the newest hypersonic strike system Oreshnik in non-nuclear version. We were forced to test it in combat conditions. No one asked Putin, but he again reported on the characteristics of the Oreshnik, now in Kazakhstan. Why is the Russian dictator again threatening to use it on Ukrainian territory? Traditional red lines, and now these red lines have been picked up by both Medvedev and Simonyan, who have started talking about it. What does the Kremlin's rhetoric of recent days indicate? We'll talk about this today with Sergei Zhirnov, a member of the KGB and the USSR Foreign Intelligence Service. Sergei, hello. Hello, Albina. Hello to all our viewers. Thank you for joining our stream. Let's start with the interview that Lukashenko gave.
Спасибо большое, что вы присоединились к нашему стриму. Давайте, наверное, начнем с интервью, которое дал Лукашенко. В интервью пропагандисту Зарубину он сказал, что...
In his conversation with Zarubin, Putin said that the reaction of foreign media supposedly shows the colossal effect of Oreshnik, and that the West is at a loss. However, Putin and Lukashenko themselves seem to be at a loss. What effect did the Kremlin expect from this strike, and what was the result? In general, of course, it's nonsense, they say. Because the effect is zero, which is why Putin has to keep coming back to it. Roughly speaking, remember the situation, for example, Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, when the Americans used the nuclear bomb. They didn't need to explain anything else. Everyone saw the results. Everyone saw the destruction. The terrible new weapon. And there was no need to say that we have no analogues, because it was already clear. In Putin's case, this whole week was a tortured one, because first he published his amended nuclear doctrine and expected the world to erupt to talk about the new scary doctrine of the Russian Federation. They, by the way, started talking about it as early as September 25th. He thought that everyone would start changing their nuclear doctrines, adjusting to it. But the Americans said that there is nothing fundamentally new in this doctrine, and they are not going to change theirs. Moreover, a few days before that, Biden authorized Ukrainian troops to use American missiles on Russian territory, although so far only in the Kursk region. Putin rushed his nuclear doctrine, although he already had a ready-made one, and announced it in order to create an information occasion. This happened against the backdrop of the G20 summit in Brazil, where he did not go and Lavrov went instead, complaining about the lack of refueling for airplanes. There was no reaction to the doctrine, and the strikes on Bryansk and Kursk continued. And Putin decided that something had to be done to scare everyone. He realized that words would not get through, not even these documents. Because in serious Western circles, they say that in Russia, it is not the document that decides everything, but Putin's decision. And so, whatever the nuclear doctrine is, we understand that he has already violated the Budapest Memorandum, violated the UN Charter. What difference does it make what he based his violation on? These are details that nobody is interested in. We are interested in deeds, not in words, and not in the papers that he says something somewhere. And then he said, well, what can we do? They invented the Oreshnik, which does not really exist. It is an old Soviet missile, although Putin claimed it was the latest development. We know what kind of hypersonic technology Russia has. 12 developers are in jail, and the Dagger missile, which is called indestructible, is easily shot down by an ordinary patriot.
Мы знаем, чем это все закончилось. Мы знаем, что несбиваемая ракета «Кинжал» сбивается обыкновенным «Патриотом» и так далее и тому подобное. Поэтому они взяли
So they took a missile that was called Rubesh. Basically, it was a sluggish development, then it was accepted, then it was canceled. It is a modification of the Yars, which in turn is a modification of the Topol. Roughly speaking, if the Yars and Topol are 3-stage missiles, then remove one stage, add 6 warheads instead of 3, and a new missile appears, which is kind of modern and not Soviet, although in fact it is all Soviet. Well, maybe they added some Chinese or Taiwanese electronics, because in Soviet times only Soviet electronics were put on ballistic missiles. And this thing hit Yuzhmash, and as we understand, nothing exploded there at all, because this missile is capable of carrying only nuclear weapons or imitating nuclear weapons. And what is a nuclear imitation dummy? It's a block of metal filled with concrete that weighs as much as a nuclear warhead. Why can't it be filled with explosives? Because when a ballistic missile is launched, it first goes into space, and then it begins to fall to the ground with terrible force, entering the dense layers of the atmosphere, and gets very hot. The metal starts to burn, everything inside heats up, just like in the Soyuz capsule when the cosmonauts get fried during solid braking. But there is more space in the Soyuz, and they put protection there so that people do not burn. In Soviet times, by the way, because of deficiencies in protection, several people simply burned up in these capsules. So, there is not much space in rockets, so you can't put explosives in them. You can put 30 to 40 kilograms of explosives, but it's nothing. When the stuff starts to heat up in the atmosphere, these 30 kilograms will explode, and the rocket will be torn to pieces. But when they entered the atmosphere, they must have disintegrated because they counted some fiery objects falling.
Просто эти 30 килограмм взорвутся, ее разорвет на кусочки, и все эти кусочки сгорят, пока падают или просто попадают горячим дождем на землю. То есть, в общем, это было такое ни о чем. И, кстати, судя по тому, что мы видели, как падали эти штуки, потому что они, скорее всего, применили, условно боевую часть, то есть имитацию боевой части.
All this Putin in general told us, but we realized that there were no explosions on the ground. What was falling was just burning metal and the remnants of concrete that were in these stockpiles. When it happened, no one was really scared because there was no destruction. Something fell from the sky there. Yes, burning makes an impression. But Ukraine, which has been falling for 2.5 years, soon 3 years, such things do not scare it anymore. Moreover, Putin said that it was a nuclear ballistic missile. But I will remind you that Iskander is also a medium-range ballistic missile that can carry a nuclear charge.
Putin сказал, что это, так сказать, баллистическая ядерная ракета. Но я вам напомню, что Искандеры это тоже баллистическая ракета средней дальности.
Dagger is capable of carrying a nuclear charge like other missiles.
Кинжал способен нанести ядерный заряд и прочие всякие ракеты, которые даже старые советские Х-101,
such as the old Soviet KH-101, KH-102, KH-59, and KH-22, which the Russian Federation is using on Ukraine.
На самом деле даже там часть из них являлась корабельными ракетами тоннами, которые несли ядерный заряд, чтобы бить по большим целям морским.
Some of these missiles were ship-based, capable of carrying a nuclear charge to hit large targets such as NATO. However, since they are cruise missiles and fly at low speed, instead of large warheads, explosives can be placed in them, creating the effect of a large bomb. You can't do that with a ballistic missile, so nothing happened and Putin had to go public, as we all remember. First, Mashka Zakharova was giving a briefing when she received a call from Gromov, informing her that Putin had suddenly decided to say something. It was necessary to cancel the briefing immediately so that she would not say too much and knock down Putin's aim, who wanted to impress. But it did not impress anyone, because all the attention was attracted only by her glued hands, which did not move for 8 minutes, although the little finger kind of twitched. Everything he said, all the experts understood that there was no Oreshnik, that it was all fiction. And again, nothing happened, made no impression. The next day, Putin had to come out again, invite the alleged Oreshnik developers, and you saw their stone faces as they sat in the Kremlin or in his bunker. He was telling them that he would award them all with medals, and they looked at him as if he was a complete idiot, because they knew that there was no Oreshnik and that it was complete nonsense. Everyone knew about it, but they didn't even want to participate in this circus. They didn't smile once. They didn't say, "How great, we are all heroes of Russia now, and we will get medals 10 times again." In the end, it turned out to be a circus with codeless. When Putin came to Astana, first he had a state visit with Tokayev, and then the CSTO meeting, where he again recalled this Oreshnik. Everyone understands that it is, in general, nonsense, but like an old fart, pardon the expression, he keeps dragging it in. Now he's got this Oreshnik thing going on, and he doesn't even realize how much he makes people laugh. I always remember my favorite nursery rhyme, "The cuckoo has put on his hood, how funny he is in his hood." Here Putin has put on this Oreshnik, like from Hawthorne, and he doesn't even realize how funny he is. Every time he repeats that there are no analogues, and everyone laughs at him. You talk about the fact that the so-called developers had to listen to all this. But what is surprising is why the leaders of the CSTO countries listen to all this. I am not much of a diplomat, but the level of such meetings where the leaders of countries sit and listen to how Oreshnik can launch a nuclear strike and how everything turns to dust in the epicenter of this strike. Is this what kind of diplomacy is this? It's called Putin's diplomacy. Don't forget that all this took place in Central Asia. Central Asia is a delicate matter. A man came from Oreshnik and says something, but no one will say to him, "Vova, you are a fool." In the East, this is not the custom. There they will smile at him, praise him, say, "You are a man," or "an old sick man," and forgive him everything. They will pour him green tea, give him kolvas, and say, "Don't worry, we are still trading with you, we are getting benefits." Although everyone is already focused on Turkey and China, and they look at Russia as a dying old man with whom they don't want to get involved. These are the rules of hospitality in the East. The Institute for the Study of War said that Putin is using Kazakhstan to circumvent sanctions. Why do you think Tokayev needs this? Kazakhstan is not the biggest country used by the Russian Federation to circumvent sanctions. There was much more going through Kyrgyzstan, through other countries.
Казахстан — это не самая большая страна, которая используется Российской Федерацией для обхода санкций. Там гораздо больше шло.
For example, foreign trade through Kyrgyzstan suddenly increased by 3 to 4%.
Потому что через Киргизию там у них внешняя торговля вдруг выросла на 3000% или на 4000%.
Kazakhstan initially circumvented the sanctions, but now claims to be complying with them, although it does not officially participate in them. However, gray imports through the country partially continue. Kazakhstan has this problem. It has a 7,000-kilometer common border with the Russian Federation. It has 3 million Russians out of a population of 19 million. It has a huge territory. It has no army. And it realizes that, in general, it is quite defenseless if Putin decides to attack Kazakhstan. I was counting after 2008, after Georgia, by the way. that Kazakhstan would be next, not Ukraine, because I thought that Ukraine was much better protected. Moreover, after 2014, when the mess in Donbass started, Ukraine started to fight back, to prepare its armed forces to become stronger, and under Trump, $2.5 billion was invested in it, including for the formation of new armed forces. It was a strategic mistake for Putin to attack Ukraine and not Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, for example, he would have conquered simply elementary, but Kazakhstan could no longer attack him, because China was now behind Central Asia. And Putin didn't have time, because I think in 2023, Xi Jinping came to Kazakhstan, and before that, he had his first official visit to Kazakhstan after the COVID. And so before that visit, he said that China is now the guarantor of Kazakhstan's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Everything, roughly speaking, Xi Jinping said to Putin, pause off. Now it's not your territory, now it's our territory. And Putin can do nothing here because otherwise he will lose $240 billion in foreign trade with China, as well as all the imports that are now coming to Russia through China. By the way, China violates much more in this sense, but it also denies it, saying that these are not state violations, but just honest companies. But now banks in China are already refusing to conduct transactions in yuan, and so on. That is, in fact, Putin has the ground burning under his feet, including in Central Asia. All the countries that received him, including today in Astana, are already reoriented, first of all towards China. Its second partner is Turkey. For example, Kazakhstan's turnover with China is 32 billion, and with Russia it is a little less, about 20 or 26 billion, but it is still quite a serious turnover. Belarus has a 50 billion turnover with Russia, which is also important for Kazakhstan, especially in the context of NPT construction. Kazakhstan is negotiating with 4 countries, including Russia, which encourages Putin to maintain peaceful relations. Там, значит, есть 4 страны, которые претендуют на право, в том числе Российская Федерация. То есть, на самом деле, Путин заинтересован в том, чтобы сейчас не нападать никакой Казахстан, и чтобы с ним поддерживать... Tokayev told Putin at the St. Petersburg Forum in 2022 that Kazakhstan does not recognize LNR, DNR, the annexation of Crimea, or the sovereignty of self-proclaimed territories, including Taiwan. This displeased Putin, demonstrating the complexity of Kazakhstan's policy. Крыма, что он не признает вообще никого, кто объявляет о своем, так сказать, территориальном суверенитете какие-то маленькие новообразования, точно так же, как Тайвань там и прочие всякие такие штуки. Вот Путину было очень неприятно. He just has to maneuver. The situation in Mongolia is even worse because it is sandwiched between China and Russia and has nowhere to go between these two giants, the Chinese tiger and the Siberian bear. Kazakhstan has access to the Caspian Sea, it has neighbors in Central Asia, and even a slice of China. In this sense, Kazakhstan has a place to go. It has a large degree of maneuverability. Plus, Kazakhstan is a strong economy, a powerful producer of uranium, which accounts for 40 to 45% of world production. That is, Kazakhstan is a serious economic component, and Putin will not be able to absorb it now. Большая степень, плюс Казахстан – это все-таки сильная экономика, это очень мощный производитель урана, это первый производитель урана, у которого 40 или 45% мирового производства урана, то есть Казахстан на самом деле серьезная экономика. And coming back to the Russian economy, after the Oreshnik strike, the ruble plummeted, and the very next day the dictator came out with the statement that you have already mentioned, that it was not an ICBM, but just an Oreshnik. And it did not change the situation much. Putin continues this rhetoric about Oreshnik, nuclear strike, nuclear charge, and so on.
И Путин продолжает вот эту вот риторику Орешник, ядерный удар, ядерный заряд возможен и так дальше.
This rhetoric that is being used now about the use of nuclear weapons, how do you think it will affect the ruble in the future? Will the ruble continue to fall? And I don't know, maybe you have some forecasts. Will the central bank be able to stabilize it? First of all, what hit the Dnieper is an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. It's just that it's old. Whether it's a Rubesh or a Yars or a Topol, something like that. But with -1 stage. It's not a new development, and the fact that Putin, so to speak, coincided that the ruble fell after this launch, I don't think these are very related things. It's just an added thing. I have to say that the situation now is not at all as catastrophic as many people imagine it to be. On the contrary, the ruble devaluation that has taken place de facto is a thing in which two large entities have an interest. The first structure is the Ministry of Finance, which needs to fill the budget with taxes, which has a very large deficit. The devaluation of the ruble helps the Ministry of Finance to fill the state budget faster as tax revenues increase with the depreciation of the ruble. This benefits the Ministry of Finance and exporters, who sell their goods for foreign currency and then convert it into rubles, receiving more rubles. Accordingly, more rubles means more taxes, more revenues to the treasury. The Ministry of Finance and exporters thus benefit from the ruble devaluation. It is important to note that the ruble has depreciated by only 10%, and for the budget and exporters, it is not a disaster. For importers, however, this situation is disadvantageous, as the cost of imported goods increases by the same 10%.
Невыгодно это тем, кто покупает иностранные товары, потому что всем импортерам на эти же 10% удорожается таким образом импорт. Но это
However, this is not tragic because Russia has already experienced similar situations, such as the devaluation of the ruble in 1994 by 50%, as well as exchange rate fluctuations at the beginning of the war, when the ruble fell to 200 per dollar. These are temporary difficulties, and although they are not a serious problem for the budget and exporters, importers and the population will still feel the effects. Importers will postpone the increase in prices of goods, which will affect the cost of imported goods for the population. This will especially make life difficult for those who have little money. As for wealthy citizens, the price increase will not greatly affect their purchasing power. Difficulties may also affect the military-industrial complex, as the production of military equipment uses components that are purchased abroad, including through China, since Russia does not have its own production of modern electronics. These components will become more expensive, and the military-industrial complex will also incur additional costs. However, this is not a catastrophe that will lead to the collapse of the Russian economy or mass protests, as many expect. No, this will not happen.
Российской электроники нету, вся электроника покупается обходными путями, либо в лучшем случае в Китае, в худшем случае там еще где-то, и поэтому за все импортные компоненты на...
These forecasts are part of political initiatives, for example, to create a public outcry or to try to influence the domestic situation. But in reality, nothing dramatic will happen. As for Biden's initiative, it is unlikely to have a specific goal to help the Democrats in their political struggle.
Все там возмутятся, выйдут на улицу, 100 миллионов хотят, чтобы Путина скинуть, вот этого ничего не произойдет, увы.
Rather, it is an attempt to provoke discussion in society, create topics for debate, and possibly put pressure on domestic politics in Russia. Yes, alas. First of all, of course, as you yourself realize, I absolutely do not like to get involved in internal Ukrainian issues. Everything that concerns the political and military problems of your country, that is for you to decide for yourselves. Being in Paris with my former Russian passport, I'm not comfortable saying anything about it. And the story with the 24 billion is, of course, more of Biden's PR, because we realize that Congress is now red, that is, Republican. And if the Republicans don't support it, and they probably won't, because they are waiting for Trump to return to the White House, then it's still more PR to show that Biden still cares about Ukraine. In fact, everything that should have been given to Ukraine should have been given last year, and Biden didn't do it. There were 6 months of congressional discussions after last year, and they couldn't vote for aid. Even now, it's clear that there's $8 billion that has already been voted on, but that apparently will never get to Ukraine. So in the end, it's more of an attempt by Biden to create some pretty face before the senile one. And a Democratic president out of his mind will fade into oblivion after Trump stops by there on January 20. Sergei, thank you very much for this conversation, for your analysis. I will remind viewers that with me today on the stream was Sergei Zhirnov, ex-employee of the KGB, the Foreign Intelligence